A quilt is many things, but essentially it's a sandwich of 3 layers: the top, the middle, and the backing. And while the top of the quilt often gets most of the attention from both the maker and the viewer, it's actually the stitch binding these layers together that's most crucial, literally holding the thing together. Whether decorative or simple, by hand or machine, the stitch is what makes the quilt a quilt. And perhaps that's why that stitch is simply called quilting. Sara Impey doesn't just stitch and doesn't just quilt. She writes with her thread. Her stitching does more than connect fabric layers, it weaves narratives. At first glance, you might assume Sara has a background in graphic design, such as her precision and interest with letters, words, and sentence arrangements. And while she appears to be incredibly talented as a designer, Sara is, in fact, a writer at heart. And the more you zoom in on her work, the more this makes total sense. Trained as a journalist, Sara brings a literary sensibility to her textile art. Words stitched into Sara's quilts are more than just embellishments. They are the connecting thread and the message itself. Through meticulous machine stitching, Sara explores themes from the personal to the political, blending language and texture in a striking, unconventional form. Yes, it's graphic and designerly and beautiful, but it's also well worth a read. Her work has been exhibited internationally, celebrated for pushing the boundaries of both contemporary quilting and conceptual art. Whether addressing global issues or the subtleties of everyday speech, Sara quietly makes observations and asks questions, inviting viewers to read and look at things differently. I'm Jo Wright, the Creative Director at Take Two, and I'd like to acknowledge the Gundungurra people who are the traditional owners of the land where I'm coming to you from today. As a passionate quilter and a huge fan of words myself, I'm really excited to welcome Sara Impey as our Friday feature artist. In the words of Ai Weiwei, everything is art, everything is politics. And today we'll talk to Sara Impey about both. Let's get started. Hi, Sara. How are you?
Hi, Jo. Hi, lovely to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us. What have you been up to? Well, it's the morning your time. What have you been up to so far today?
Well, it is the morning, so I basically just got up. Sort of spent the weekend in the Netherlands at the AGM of the group that I belong to, Quilt Art, in a place called Velp. And so I've been traveling.
That's amazing. So that's the it's an art collective, right? That you.
That's right. It's quite a small group. There's only 16 of us, some Brits, and the rest are scattered around Europe with one American. So we meet up as often as we can, and we have an AGM, annual general meeting, every year, obviously. And this year it was in the Netherlands. So I just had a girls' road trip, which was great fun.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us on this Friday feature artist.
It's a pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yeah, like I said in the intro, I'm a quilter and a lover of words, so I'm just thrilled to be chatting with you. We're coming to you on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll also be dropping this episode as a podcast. So if you're listening in, I highly recommend to our listeners that you take a look at the show notes. The link is in our episode description, and that's so that you can see the beautiful work that Sara and I will be discussing today. So shall we get started, Sara?
Okay.
I would like to know, Sara, for someone who is listening and who's never seen your work before, how would you describe it?
Well, they are all technically quilts that I make, and I am a quilter by background, although I should say I am self-taught. And a quilt is essentially 3 layers of fabric held together with stitch. And a lot of people have an image of a quilt as a piece of patchwork thrown over a bed and something that your grandmother did and that kind of thing. But obviously I'm working in the realm, I hope, of contemporary textile art and trying to, as it were, express my through making these things. So they're not huge. They're not like a huge bedspread. You know, they're intended for display. They're intended for the wall, and they're intended to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I find so interesting about textiles and fibre art and quilts in particular is their connection to domesticity and their connection to women and that history of women making things for the home, and also fashion. And sometimes those connections can sometimes be reductive to the people who don't understand, or to the wrong ears, if that makes sense. So I wanted to start by showing one quilt in particular, and this is a recent quilt of yours called Outsider Art. And Sarah, before we chat about this quilt, can you just describe it for those who are listening?
Well, this is a very small piece, actually. It's only 40 centimetres square, which is about 17 inches. And it consists of quotations from prominent commentators on the textile art scene. And not necessarily, well, it's all about textiles and textile art, but it's not necessarily complementary always. It is an outsider's view sometimes of what textile art consists of. And the first quotation, which says, "Women have frittered their lives away, stitching things for which there's no demand, ever since vicarious leisure was invented," which was Germaine Greer from Australia, obviously, back in 2007. And I remember reading that in The Guardian and thinking, that's, you know, I thought she was supportive of the sisterhood. And actually, she's rather looking down on it. But I just thought it was such a wonderful quote. And so I then actively looked for quotations in the press for of people who were making slightly derogatory comments about textile art and just didn't get it, if you know what I mean. So some of those quotations from that, and some of them are a bit more complimentary, and by the time you get to the end, they are, you know, very complimentary. Textile arts are powerful tools for communication, but it's sort of questions that people ask, like, and I end with, "How long did it take to make?" which is a tribute to from 20,000 years ago to the present. It's a question I ask all the time, and I never quite know how to answer.
I think every quilt maker gets. I think every quilt maker gets asked that question: how long did it take to make?
And to me, it's a rather meaningless question, because I don't care how long it took to make. It took as long as it took, and you know, you could do it. You could say a number of hours. You know, it took 40 hours or something, which is it's all fairly meaningless. And I could say it took 3 weeks, but one person's 3 weeks is another person's 3 years. It depends what else is going on in your life. All I can say is if you the answer to that question, how long did it take to make? Not as long as you would think, because I've done this for so much of it now that I've got it down to sort of, I don't think I waste any time. I think I'm quite efficient at it. And something like that. You look at all that machine stitch lettering, letter by letter, free machine stitching. It wouldn't take me more than, I don't know, 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
But it's small. It is very small.
I think it helps people be impressed when they hear how long something takes. They're looking to understand, but some of the other quotes are really fabulous. And they do travel down the quilt, like you said, from sort of not so complimentary to, "If you're dressed when you read this, you'll know why sewing matters," which was a quote by Barbara
absolutely.
Burnham.
That's a great quote, isn't it? Yes, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And another one, "Textiles permute the politics of materiality and exchange in all their labours, pains and pleasures," which is Julia Bryan Wilson.
Yes.
And then, of course, "How long did it take to make?"
How long did it take? Well, I do like to kind of lighten up a bit and inject some humour where I can, you know.
Yes.
I'm very serious about my work, but I don't take it too seriously. I don't know if that makes sense. You know, I like.
You're serious about your practice, but perhaps the content can lighten up.
Yeah.
Well, that I think that quilt was my starting point, because it led me to want to ask you, what do textiles mean to you, Sarah? What is it about quilts, and what is it that means something to you? Not Germaine Greer, to you.
Well, I suppose anybody who works with textiles is going to say the same thing. It's handling the fabrics, it's the beauty of fabrics, it's playing with. There's something about, even when you're working on the machine, there's something about the rhythmic, incremental process of stitching, which hasn't really changed for millennia. I mean, a stitch is still a stitch. And this sort of, this connection with textile makers from the past, which you mentioned earlier on, is quite important. But it's just that with textiles, I really felt I found my medium. I mean, as a child, I grew up on a farm. I have quite a rural upbringing. All my uncles, both my grandfathers and my father, were all farmers in this very small area in Essex, which is about 60 miles northeast of London. And I was the first member of my family to go to university, and I've lost my thread here. Textiles. My father, who, as I say, was a farmer, was a sort of reluctant farmer. He fell into it when he came back from the war because there was really nothing else he could do but take over the family farm. But he was completely temperamentally unsuited to it. He loved travel, he liked art, he liked photography, he liked archaeology, and he had a range of interests. And he was very encouraging to myself and my brother, and he was to draw and paint. And he was always supplying us with materials and things like that. And I did draw a bit as a child, but really it didn't sort of take off with me. It did with my brother, who subsequently, became a graphic designer and didn't go into farming. And with me, it wasn't until I started stitching that I felt that I'd found my medium. And even now, I don't draw. I can't draw. I don't need to draw very much making these things. And but when I made my first quilt at the age of 17, something clicked. I thought, yes, this is it. This is what I want to do. There it is. Yeah. So this was made in 1971 when I was 17. And it's all made out of my mother's dressmaking scraps. She was a very keen amateur dressmaker. Like a lot of people who grew up during the war, they just basically had to make their own clothes. And she kept all her fabric, bits of fabric. And I was about 17 when I should have been revising for my A-levels, which are the exams you take when you leave school. And I spent a happy week sitting on the floor, cutting out hexagon dressmaking scraps and stitching them together. And I'd never seen a quilt before. I'd never seen a patchwork quilt. And she had produced out of nowhere this hexagon template and sort of showed me how to do it, to cut things out on bits of card. And I just remember that I really, really enjoyed doing it. And of course, this quilt has got no bought fabrics in it whatsoever. So the bright red fabrics that you can see there was a party dress I had when I was 6. And it's got old night dresses and all sorts of other things. And even some of her clothes. So some of these fabrics might date back to the 50s and maybe even the 40s.
And you still have this one, don't you?
I still got it. And it's not technically a quilt because there's no layer, there's no batting or wadding in the middle. It's technically a coverlet. It's not actually quilted, it's just pieced. It was actually several years before I understood that there was a difference between patchwork and quilting. To me, they were synonymous for many years. And it's technically all over the place. And you can see, I tried to distribute the fabrics randomly, but I haven't really succeeded.
Well, I think I can see something.
I really enjoyed doing it. I love playing with the fabrics. I love putting patterned fabrics together, which was something when I was growing up you never did. You either wore plain shirt and a patterned skirt or the other way around. And it was I just really, really enjoyed doing it. And
I can see that something stuck because the persistence required to do a hexagon quilt for your first quilt.
I know.
Something must have really stuck.
These days, if you're coming new to patchwork and quilting, you'd get straight on the sewing machine with your rotary cutter and do lots of,
Yeah. And you'd
cabins
probably
or
start
squares.
with rectangles, right?
Yeah, but in my day. And it's just something I then put it on one side because I went to university, as I say, and all the rest of it, and didn't take it up again for several years. But it was just something in the back of my mind that I always remembered enjoying, that how much I enjoyed doing it.
Yes. I'm a little bit parallel too, Sarah, because I tried it in my teens, quilting, and I think it was hexagons, and it was these peach, very 90s fabrics. And I didn't get as far as you. I think I connected about 3 or 4 of them and then put it to one side. And then it was a good couple of decades before it even entered my mind again. But something about it stuck, the graphic nature, the shapes, the color combinations.
Yeah.
It's something about
the rhythmic nature of sewing. I mean, I wasn't a great sewer as a child. My mother, I didn't like her sewing machine very much. I never used it. And I mean, I quite enjoyed working with my hands. I used to do a lot of that French knitting, making these endless strings of wool. You can't do anything with once you've made them. But some people who come to stitching, they make dolls' clothes and they've got a whole lifetime of it. But with me, it was this one thing that I just really enjoyed. And what I love, because I did do, we had to do dressmaking at school, and I absolutely hated it. All I can remember is queuing to use the various machines and the iron and things like that, and then having to rip your seam out because it was crooked and queuing over again, and it was sort of a never-ending cycle that never seemed to result in anything finished that you could enjoy. Horrible fabrics.
Yes.
So I dropped needlework as soon as I could, and really hated it at school. But as I say, this one piece, and it was something about also making something that was flat. I didn't have to drape it around a body. There was no notches and darts or anything like that.
The fit didn't matter. Yep.
I just grew it until I sort of and then I stopped.
Yeah. So we've established a love of quilts or stitching. And then I guess the next thing I'd like to ask you about is your love of words. And I have one of your earlier text-based works to show connected to this idea. And this one is called Punctuation. And this is actually in the Victoria and Albert collection, which is an incredible accomplishment, Sarah. But I'd like to ask you about this piece, and there's a few directions I'd like to come at it from. One is, how did you make it? And my other question is, what's it about?
Well, how did I make it? It's all one piece of fabric, which in the quilting world we call whole cloth. What I did was I quilted a grid over the entire thing in the same color as the background fabric, which is a cream silk, so that I'm left with a sort of a template, which is a grid. And then I filled in the squares with free machine stitching. And how I create the lettering for something like this, where I'm working on a grid, is I will print them out large on the computer, for example, the letter A, and then I will cut it out on sticky labels, rather like those parcel labels you get. So I've got paper A, and I will stick it in the middle of the square where I want it to go, and stitch around it with free machine stitching. So I've got the outline of an A, and then I fill in the background of the square with free machine zigzag going first up, across, and then down and down and down, so that the actual letters are unstitched. It's the surrounding that's stitched. Does that make sense? And then I changed the color of, obviously I drew a line to get the various sort of 3 panels colors and the circle. And when I hit that line, I would change the color of the thread. So so that's basically how I made it. And what it's about, well, first of all, I should say that particular exhibition, it was in the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2010, and it was called Quilts 1700 to 2010, Untold Stories, Hidden Histories, or Hidden Histories, Untold Stories. And the curator of this exhibition came to my house about 2 years before the exhibition opened, and to sort of see my stuff. And she was very taken with a quilt that was very like this because of the language on it. And which was inspired by a letter I found after my mother died, written to her by what must have been an old flame, or a family friend, certainly. And he'd signed off this letter, "See you suddenly one day." And I just loved that phrase. I thought it was quite haunting. It could be read in quite a number of different ways. And another phrase in the same letter was, "Never did like punctuation." So I kind of wrote the text almost as a poem, although, I don't want to make any claims for it. "See you suddenly one day at the gap between thoughts, or in the colour of speech," or anyway, it goes on. And then at the end it said, "Never did like punctuation." And then it repeats, "See you suddenly one day." And I think the curator was quite taken with the history of this, the fact that I'd found it in my mother's correspondence, and how when you find things like that, they're sort of reinvented by every subsequent generation in a way. They sort of speak through the ages. And I think that was what, she picked up on with this particular piece. In fact, the piece I showed her was very similar to that. It was sort of like a first draft. And I hadn't been happy with that because it had various problems. It wasn't square, and it was meant to be square, and it hung really badly, and I didn't like the colors and loads of things. So as there was so much time before the exhibition opened, I said, well, could I make another one? So the one that went into the show is the second one that I made. And then at the end of the show, it was a fabulous experience. The whole show, the private view, was fantastic. And at the end of it, their V&A bought it for their collection. So it was just wonderful for me. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that's an incredible achievement. I love that. "See you suddenly one day," and I find with all your quilts, you read them and you start asking questions. You think, "See you suddenly one day," and it's like, who was this person? Was this how they signed off all their letters, or were they a bit of a quirky, humorous person, or was it a song lyric? It's just all these questions that come from these statements and words, and
that's
it's
right.
intriguing.
It could be read in a number of ways, and it just appealed to me. And I called the whole quilt punctuation.
Almost that by having words on a piece, you open up more possibilities and more questions than if you don't have words. Do you know what? Like,
you do.
There's no literality.
That's very true, but it very much depends on the words. They can also be quite didactic and unambiguous as well. I mean, a quilt like that, yes, it's can be read in a number of ways, but sometimes I'm a bit more direct, and there's no ambiguity whatsoever.
We'll get to a few of those more direct ones, which will be really interesting. A few more, I guess, that talk about words or the idea of words. This one is called Absorption. And this one, when I was looking at it, it felt like a diary entry about your relationship to stitch and thread. So this is 2014 piece. We're going all over the place. We're not going chronologically. We're going according to a bit of a long and winding story here. But I'd love to know about the words when you write them on your quilt.
This one, sorry to talk through you. This one was actually a poem I wrote, which I submitted to a competition, and it won second prize. So I thought, right, okay, that's great. Because I do write a bit of poetry. I don't make any claims for it whatsoever, and I belong to a couple of writing groups locally, which is good fun. I mean, it's just fun, actually. Anyway, this was a poem about the nature of sewing on the sewing machine from the point of the stitcher. And I'm not a great fan of stitching poetry onto my quilts, mostly because I think it's very easy to stray into the realms of sentimentality.
Yes.
And I really, really, really want to avoid that at all costs. But I felt because this one had the endorsement of having won an award, that that was okay. I could do that. So I was trying to think of how to display it graphically. And because it's all about, I rub the sleep from my hands and warm my eyes on yesterday's colours. I leave words at the door. They have no business here. While you're stitching, it's a sort of wordless activity. And so the whole thing is about the words come in at the end and they miss the point. They don't get it at all. And I was trying to think, well, how can I write this, do it on a quilt where I wanted the text to cover the entire quilt. So in the background, as you can see, I had stitched the words in different colors. right over. This isn't huge, this quilt. I mean, it's maybe a couple of feet across. I can't remember now. I was sold a few years ago. I mean, it's not massive, but I had to stitch the word words on free machine stitching with every single letter stitched separately about 267 times over the whole thing to form the background.
You must be really quick at changing the thread on your machine.
Am I completely mad? You know, is this just the most ridiculous thing to have to do.
I was just going to say, you're really quick at changing the thread on your machine. You must be almost be able to do it blindfolded and backwards.
Pretty damn good at changing the thread on the machine.
I can see how you're, even though it's a poem, you can see that you're treating it in a straightforward visual way. You're not using sort of floral cursive writing.
No. Oh, that's
very simple sans serif, and you're using a grid, and then you're saying words. So it's like, make no mistake.
Yeah.
I'm not being overly floral here.
I have a little bit of a horror of cursive. Lovely for other people to do it, but of cursive writing on fabric, because you know it's great to use cursive writing because you know you don't have to keep finishing off the ends in between. You know, you can just make it run on by looping your L's or your G's or whatever it is. But I think there's always a danger that it sort of looks a little bit childlike and naive, cursive writing. And I'm trying to look obviously I'm trying to look classy and sophisticated. So I always use capital letters. You don't have to do the I, you know, do a dot for the I and all that sort of stuff. I always use capital letters, and of course capital letters are great because they're all the same height, and if you're stitching round in a circle, for example, it's, you know, you get a nice smooth line gap between the lines. So I always stitch in capitals. I'm not wild about cursive writing, but when you say making the text cover the whole fabric and not introducing any other element, unless it's a geometric shape. I mean, I'd like that. I absolutely deliberately do that. I like the text to be an integral part of the design, if you see what I mean. Yes. And not be just like one word, like death or whatever. You know, and then or a design with bits of text on it. I like the text to be absolutely the thing. You know, the thing that holds it all, design-wise and construction-wise, and hopefully meaning-wise as well. When you find an idea that marries all these things, it's absolutely brilliant. And ideas like that don't come along every day. You know, people say to me, "Oh, you have loads of ideas." Actually, I don't. I have very few ideas, but I eke them out.
Squeeze every inch.
So listen, when your brother ideas that marry the visual side, the stitch side, and the semantics, you know, the meaning, the context, hard to find. They're really hard to find.
Yeah. When your brother was studying graphic design, were you watching? Were you in the background paying attention?
I'm trying to think where I was at that time. I was working on the newspaper. No, actually, I didn't. No, he went off in a completely different direction, and no. Yeah.
There's such a
I don't think of myself as graphic, as a graphic. I mean, I have no because I have no training in any kind of graphics. I tend to stick, as you will notice, to bold geometric shapes like circles and squares, and I'm a little bit frightened of pictorial things or things that are very free and collagey. I really admire people do it, but I'm very comfortable with squares, circles, big, bold. I mean, the effect might not be big and bold, but most of my stuff is based on a grid to start with, or parallel lines. And I'd love to be able to do pictorial things, but I think if I tried to do that, it would be just disastrous, really.
Yeah. The reason I ask is
absolutely starting from scratch. So
the reason
I'm sticking with the devil I know.
the reason I ask is because it's definitely in the world of a graphic designer to be very focused on the arrangements of letters, words, and sentences in space and how they can be pulled out to create shapes and ideas visually. So I did wonder if
yes, I am aware of it. I'm not a calligrapher either.
No.
So I had to sort of, you just get to know by eye the distance between the letters, the distance between lines of letters, rows of letters, and getting it all to fit into the space that you have available. And, it's something I've just sort of been quietly working at with, as I make these things over the years. And I am very aware of it, but I don't have any training. And I probably break every single rule if there is a rule.
I don't think
without knowing.
No, I think it's so interesting, and they're so beautiful and appealing as well. So even if you zoom in and you read the words and they're a little bit more confronting, which we'll talk about in a moment, they're so pleasing visually, and the proportion and so obviously I have a graphic design background. That's why I'm
oh, well, that's very kind of you to say so. A lot of it's
let's look at a work that's not flat, and this one is called Following the Thread, and I was really interested in your idea behind this. Again, it looks like you're talking about the nature of words and fabric. So yeah, I'd love to hear a bit about this work. And for those listening, it looks like a spool of thread or a spool of ribbon, and Sarah has stitched letters into that ribbon, and it winds around and around and around the spool.
Yes, well, this piece, I mean, the spool I found in an antique shop. It's about maybe 14 inches high, to give you some idea of scale, so that the tape that's wound round it is about less than an inch high, probably about 3/4. I don't know if you still use inches in Australia, but anyway, less than an inch tall. So this is in fact a quilt, but it's a quilt that's sort of less than an inch high and about 8 meters long. And the text is an essay again on the process of stitching from the point of view of the stitcher, and the way we're all connected to stitches, or I feel very connected to stitches of the past. And I just thought it would be fun, because it's ridiculous. I thought it'd be fun to spool it round a spool as if it was a reel of cotton or something. But of course, it's crazy because you can't read the whole thing. Most of it is covered up by, it's quite a thin spool actually. And and I think, well, does that matter? And I think, well, no, I don't think it really matters, because supposing I were to exhibit it, I mean, sometimes with these things, I will provide a text, and the gallery will put the text beside the thing, so that if anybody, has got the time and energy, they can read the whole thing. But I had to make this tape, which is, I say, is a quilt, so it's 3 layers of fabric with batting in the middle, and it was 8 meters, and I had to sort of lay it on the floor outside my workroom in the house I lived in at that time, all the way down a corridor, sort of past the kitchen, this piece, in order to kind of, get it to the state where I could actually start stitching the lettering. And
how wonderful! So you've stitched
quite physical business quilting sometimes, I would say. You do spend a lot of time crawling around on the floor. You do.
It's true. But it's fascinating that you've wrapped the majority up of it into the spool. But I guess this is the thing. You invite someone to ask more questions, doesn't it?
Well, I suppose it does. In a way, it's crazy. And I've done other quilts that take the form of chains. And you can't obviously read all of them at once, because some of them will be hidden either underneath or around the other side or something.
Yeah.
And I think sort of, well, it sort of matters to me that the text makes sense. But I don't know, people can just look at it and get the general idea. And if you're thinking about other types of art, like one of Grace and Perry's pots, I mean, you can't read the whole thing at once. You have to turn it round. And if it's displayed where you can't see the back, you can't see. And so I think, well, yes, it's because, I do care about the text, and I do spend quite a lot of time writing it. But it's really more important for me. And I just hope people sort of get the general idea. I find that when it's a piece of fabric like the one behind me, which has got lettering on sort of curly lines, some people will stand there and take the trouble to puzzle it all out. And some of the lettering's upside down because it just follows the lines around. And some people don't. And it really doesn't matter. It's up to them. Some people just get the gist and move on, and that's absolutely fine. But I need to know. I need to know that it makes sense.
Have you ever observed people looking at your work and watched their reaction, or do they go up really close? Or
it is fun to do that kind of incognito. Hope you don't hear anything terrible. Yeah, I find one of the things, because I'm using text, is that it my quilts do sometimes appeal to men as well as women, because they home in on the text side rather than how long did it take to make, and what wadding did you use, and all that kind of thing, and how did you do it. And yes, I found that some of the people who've bought my quilts have been men, which is quite interesting, because they like the sort of the text side of it and what it's actually saying, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, speaking of I think it's really worth noting, and you mentioned it earlier, that Sara does all of the stitching by machine, which is incredibly, it's very impressive, having tried to quilt on a machine myself, pushing and pulling the thing through. But all your lettering is machine stitched, as well as the designs that go around. And sometimes, as we saw in some of those earlier quilts, it's incredibly dense. You go backwards and forwards and create sort of shading or cross-hatching with your thread.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the meaning of the words now, because your background is in journalism, and that has certainly come into play as a theme in lots of your quilts. And I have one here. This is the work in progress image of hustings. And then this is the full piece. And I was curious to know about this quilt specifically, which, for those listening, is a piece, and it looks like hundreds of speech bubbles. And in every speech bubble is, what would you say? They're sort of phrases, or even some of them are cliches or corporate lingo, jargon. But yeah, Sara, I should probably let you describe this one because you made it.
Yes. This one, I called it hustings, which, for those who don't know, is a sort of, in the UK, it's meetings that you have with potential parliamentary candidates. They go around to local communities and talk to people, and that's called a hustings. And this is actually divided into two, as you can see, it's divided into two parts, but the blue side on the left purports to be a political speech from a potential parliamentary candidate. But it's a political speech that could be made by any political party, because basically all it's doing is flattering the audience and making sort of promises that you couldn't possibly disagree with, like, we need to improve education, we need to improve health, welfare, and that kind of thing. And just with all these sort of big grand ideas, we're going to make sure every pound is spent wisely, and that kind of, nobody can disagree with that, can they? So it's really about empty rhetoric and the sort of vacuousness of some of these political speeches. In fact, my work isn't really political. It's more about the language around politics. So that's on the left side. And it does read as a speech. I mean, you probably can't see it off the screen, but if you read across the bubbles from left to right, as you would read, it is actually a connected political speech. I don't know if you can see on the left, where are we? Oh yeah, we will reduce waste and make sure that every pound of money is spent effectively or wisely spent. or something. So you can actually, if you, as I say, if you stand there long enough, puzzle it out as to what is being said. On the right is a series of phrases which are really kind of puncturing it all. A series of phrases that you get a lot in politics, like tunnel vision, hidden agenda, you know, ways in which it can actually go wrong, all the kind of reality things that anyone who's elected will come up against as soon as they actually get into power. So that it's really about empty rhetoric, and I just had a lot of fun. This is a case where I had to write it to fit it, absolutely, because I stitched all the speech bubbles first. So I had a whole quilt of empty speech bubbles.
Oh my
goodness.
Then
I had to fill them in, writing it to fit. So I actually had to make it up in my head as I stitched it, because I had a piece written down, but I couldn't follow that, because if I've actually done a very small speech bubble and the next word is infrastructure, it's kind of not going to work. So I had to actually to write the speech to fit the bubbles that were already there. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
And I've tried to center each of the text inside the little bubbles, which sometimes I'm doing it by eye, so sometimes it's more successful than others. It matters a lot to me when I'm doing it, but I don't think it really, I mean, it's not perfect. It's a bit like handwriting. It's not perfect. But I try to be perfect, but I'm not. I'm absolutely not perfect. But that was really the reason, the rationale, if you like, behind that piece.
It's fantastic, and even that process you describe of having to find the right words to fit the speech bubble is like what a politician does in an interview.
Well, in a way,
they get asked a question and then they're just like plucking out. It's like, oh, which one will fit this speech bubble?
Yeah, but I have to construct the whole sentence so that it, so the words are going straight from my brain to my needle without going through in the intermediate thing. I'm not writing on the fabric first, even. I just dive in and do it. That to me is the really, really exciting part. I mean, it doesn't get very exciting in quilting, let's face it, but that's the moment when you're kind of, your heart's in your mouth and you say, hang on, is this going to fit? Am I going to have to unpick it all and start again? And that's the sort of seat of the pants moment when I really like it, because it seems to me that that's the really creative point of it. If you see what you're absolutely in the moment, trying to work out how you can do it.
Because you don't, except for perhaps an example like absorption, where you had written.
I mean, that was obviously much more time.
You improvise as you write, correct?
Oh yeah. I mean, it depends what I'm writing. Something like the speech bubble, I definitely did. And then when I the hustings one, yes, when I'd finished it, I didn't really know exactly what I'd written, so I took it along to the computer and sort of copied out from the quilt what I'd actually written. And I was really pleased, because it kind of had the cadences of a political speech. It sounded like it. Everything in threes.
Send it to your closest MP.
This and this and this. Clack, 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 clack. It's. I was really chuffed, actually.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've got a couple more to show, and I guess I think that's a really interesting connection to your journalistic background. Is you're not expressing a viewpoint or an opinion, you're observing and documenting and pointing things out and allowing the viewer to interpret and understand in their own. Is that a fair connection that I've made?
So. I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't describe myself as a political animal. But I certainly wouldn't ever want to influence anybody in any way. I'm just trying to point out absurdities. Actually, that was about empty rhetoric. It wasn't really about politics. It was about the language of politics. And some of my pieces have been about how language can be used to. It can be used to powerful effect, for good and to also to mislead. And it's very topical now, of course, what's happening.
Yeah.
So I'm not actually being didactic with these things. I'm just wanting people to sort of think about it, That's all.
Yeah. Stop and think. Yeah. or read. Stop and read.
Yeah.
Here's another work. It's called No Exit. And Sarah, could you describe this for those who are listening?
Yeah. Well, as you can see, the text is in concentric circles. And somebody once said to me, you showed an image a couple of slides ago of a work in progress, and you see all the threads that are on the surface. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Before you actually do something with them and finish them off. And somebody said, "Oh, that looks nice. Why don't you leave the threads on the top?" So I thought, "Whoa, why not? Let's see what happens." So in this one, I didn't finish off the threads, and all it says in these circles is, "I keep on going round in circles, and I keep losing the thread," and it repeats that across the entire surface of the piece. And in the end, I felt it was really it came to me slightly late in the. It was really about dementia, actually. I called it No Exit, which is a bit depressing, I know. But my mother-in-law had dementia, and I'm sure it's touched lots of people's families. And so it's one of the ones that I like to think works on various levels, because the text, I keep going around in circles, I keep on losing the thread, is mirrored by the actual look of the piece and the threads which are hanging loose. And I've just, when I'd finished, it was quite quick to do because I didn't have to finish off all the ends, obviously. But it was a fiddle because I had to push all those threads. I start in the middle and work outwards. I had to push all those threads into the middle as I stitched, and they kept getting in the way. And it was, it was a bit fiddly to do. And then at the end, I combed them out. I mean, literally with a comb, I combed them out over the surface like the spokes of the wheel. And they're not held to the background by anything. It's just the threads that sort of stick onto the background fabric. So every time this piece is moved or stored or rolled up, it gets into a complete tangle. And I have to say to gallery, please, can you comb it out? Use a comb. You don't worry, you won't break a thread. And if you do, it doesn't matter. Just comb it. Put it in the instructions. And,
yes, your gallery instructions are, we'll need a comb.
yeah. Bring a comb.
Bring a comb.
So that was this one, yes. And the idea being that the threads are obscuring the words, and it's all becoming, I think you get the metaphor, I hope.
Yeah, and the visual effect of it is so striking as well. And yeah, like you say, they sort of make the words harder to read, and then you realize you're reading the same thing over and over again. So there's
the same thing over again. And actually, somebody I know said, I don't know anything about dementia really, but said sometimes people go through a phase of anger when they realize what's happening to them. And so the red there seemed quite appropriate, but that wasn't actually intended. It was done because I just wanted to do that. But it's fun if people see things in your pieces that you hadn't thought of. I mean, that's absolutely lovely. I love that.
Yeah. There's another piece here that I'll show as well where perhaps the red is intended, which is called Fighting Talk from 2018. And this looks like a target with a splotch of red.
The crosshairs of a gun. And
yes.
The texts are all words, mostly, but not entirely, military metaphors that we use in everyday speech unthinkingly, like cannon fodder, smoking gun, licking one's wounds, and things like running on empty and beating a hasty retreat. Words we use in everyday speech, but which have military backgrounds. And again, it's to point out the sort of like the danger of language in really, really difficult situations. I actually made this when Donald Trump in his first presidency went to North Korea and was having a conversation with Kim Jong-un, and there was a sense then that a mistranslation or a misword or a word could be taken wrongly, and the world was kind of on the brink, and how important language is in these kind of situations, and how we shouldn't really be careless with it if we're thrust into that kind of situation. And goodness me, are we not in the middle of it now?
Here we are, finding ourselves in the same position.
And I had a good fun with this because I really love doing the stitch splat I'm very proud
Yeah.
of my splat, which is entirely done in the thread. And it is actually a real splat that I got some food colouring and in a syringe and squirted it onto a piece of card and then traced around it to get the outline, because I didn't want it to look like a comic book splat. Do you know what I mean? I wanted it to look real.
It looks very convincing, and you zoom in and you realise with relief that it's
just red thread. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I thought you were about to say that you had squirted it on the quilt, which took my breath away.
I say I don't think even I would have dared to do that. No, I used the outline, which was a genuine splat, if you like. and sort of, I can't remember how I did it. I must have got tracing paper or something and traced it onto the fabric, and then filled in the again with my zigzag, which go first that way, then that way, free machine stitching.
Yeah.
That's how I did it.
And is that I guess it's definitely a theme, but is that one of your hopes when people look at your work, is that they think to themselves, or they're reminded that words are so important?
Yes, to some extent, but I mean, I don't make it. I really, I don't make any great claims for them. They are what they are. It's what I wanted to do at the time, and if people see something in it, that's a bonus. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a few more I'd like to show, which well, when we see that they were made in 2020, we'll all know what was happening in the world at that time. But they were, I'm not sure if you would call them COVID quilts, but we have one called Flying the Flag 2020.
Yes. Well, this one is a record of all the cumulative death total day by day over the first period of the first lockdown in 2020, from March till June. And on the television news every night, they would just give the number of deaths that day, and how it had added up. And so I just made a note of them as you went through the weeks. And you can see that on March the 23rd, when we first locked down in the UK, there were 336. And on June, whatever it was, there were 42,000. It's just unbelievable. And I stitched them on the Union Jack because at that time, the UK seemed to be doing worse by almost any measure than any other country in Europe. And one wasn't particularly proud to be British. And so that is why the Union Jack is kind of fading out. That's what that one is. So it needs a bit of an explanation to go alongside it. Otherwise, the figures are completely meaningless. But it was stitched, yes, at the time.
Yeah. It's such a poignant memory in those numbers. I mean, Australia
it's horrifying, isn't it? You forget, it's all so recent, but we've it's history already, isn't it?
Yeah. I often find myself in those conversations where you're thinking it was just a few years ago where we were having to sign in to everywhere we went and wearing masks. And you look at photos from around that time and everyone's wearing masks, and that number that every night on the news, and we were all locked in looking at these numbers. So I think you've documented this thing, but it almost reminds me of wartime memorials, the way you've treated it, and even the colours and the use of the flag. It reminds me of a memorial from a long time ago. I think you've given it that gravitas, if that makes sense. It's beautiful.
Maybe,
yeah. What a document. And I guess this one is perhaps, and I'm making an assumption, a bit more of a personal one.
This is one of my favourite pieces I've ever done. This was made in stitched tapes, rather like the Following the Thread one, except they're each about 1 metre long, and then I wove them in and out like a basket at the end. If you look at the image on the right, you can see that the verticals are going in and out of the horizontals. And the text is actually a diary that I kept day by day from that first day of the lockdown until that June. So I would stitch what everything that had been happening the day before, both in my own life and nationally. So you have things like Boris Johnson going into hospital, the Queen making a speech, all the deaths every day, along with things like we literally moved into this house 2 weeks before the lockdown. And so we had a new garden, everything was new, and it was all about what was happening in the garden. I had a grandson aged 2 at the time, and what was happening. So it was a mixture of the personal and the public, if you like. And there was a reason I made it in tapes rather than getting a big piece of fabric and just starting to stitch on day by day like a diary, was because actually I didn't know how it was going to end, obviously. I mean, I didn't know if I was going to survive this or if any of us were. I mean, you forget, it's so recent, but we forget how fearful we all were, and how, I was slightly, I was slightly shocked to discover at the beginning of the pandemic that I was an older person. When they were saying, oh, people over 60 are particularly vulnerable, I was thinking, oh my God, that's me. I hadn't dawned on me before that I was an older person. And I had a son who had a learning disability and other problems, and he was very vulnerable. And you forget how we did not know how this was going to end. Yeah. So I thought, if I make a piece which is a diary in tapes and strips, then I can make of it, I can stop it at any point, and I can make of it what I want at the end. So at the end of the 3 months or 2 months or whatever it was, I had 60 or so of these strips that I'd written. And I thought, well, what on earth shall I display them? And I was thinking I could just have them scattered over the floor or something. And then I thought, no, I'd make them into one piece. And I had the idea of weaving them together like a basket. And the idea was that it was a most peculiar time where we all felt very connected to one another. We were all going through the same experience at the same time. But equally, we were apart from one another because we couldn't meet. And there was this sense of total disruption. So you get on the quilt that the horizontal texts are disrupted all the time by the vertical text that's going down, which are the last few ones that I made. And I like to think that this is a sort of another metaphor for what was actually going on at the time, this curious dichotomy of being both together and apart, and the whole of our lives being sort of turned upside down. And it's a quilt that you couldn't repeat. And I made it at the time, day by day. So it's of its time. And so it's one of my favorite pieces, actually. It's not one that I would ever sell, I don't think.
Yes. No, it's just the simplicity of the colors too. And that repetition of days.
Sorry, I'm talking across you. I chose a different, I wanted the colors to be very neutral. But I did choose a different color every day. So there'll be a pale blues, pale greens, pale grays. So just to lend a kind of a rhythm and a variety to it, and make it less boring for me, to be honest, to to stitch. But
yes, we have to remember what it was like.
So I thought it'd be visually more interesting if it wasn't just one single color of thread all the way through, but that you've got little bits of very grayish purple. They're all on the gray kind of spectrum.
But perhaps the images aren't quite showing the subtlety and color change.
The right hand side, there's blue in there. There's grey. There's probably a pale brown and a pale purple and green. So that was why I did that, just to make it a bit more interesting, really.
I think it would be interesting. There's a work here, and you kindly provided images of the layers as you built the quilt up. So we might talk about hidden agenda now, and I'll let you talk through this one, and you just let me know when to progress to the next slide, so that the journey is unfolding as you speak, Sarah. So we'll start
we'll give it a go. Yes, I'm absolutely in love with the phrase hidden agenda when you're thinking of terms from political speeches and political commentary that you hear a lot of the time. And a lot of the reason for that is that it's 6 letters, which very neatly, it works very well from my
but you're not a graphic designer. No.
No, not a graphic designer, no. But I mean, hidden agenda, it just, it ticks all my boxes for perfect. And so I first quilted this in a grid behind, which I think you can see. And then I did these letters in grey, which, as you can see, are positioned over the whole thing. And if you show the next slide, yeah, then I stitched the letters in colour over the top of the hidden agenda. So you've got your meaning going on there as well, because the hidden agenda is being hidden, if you see what I mean. And the text is all about the threats to democracy, spreading disinformation, undermining trust in domestic democratic processes, empty rhetoric from propaganda, alternative facts. And all this seems old hat now because we're all in the middle of it, aren't we? But this was a couple of years ago when it was more of a threat than an actuality. Obfuscation, conspiracy theories, fake news, etc., etc., etc. So that text is done in exactly the same way, where I make stencils of the letters and then I stitch them. But in this one, I stitched the actual letters rather than stitching the space around the letters, if you see what, unlike the earlier one where I was describing this. So you've got that on top of the hidden agenda. And then in the next one, I've done another text over the top of the entire thing, which I did in red, which on the screen, on my screen anyway, you can barely see actually. But the red
have a detail here.
It's actually saying the same thing, but it's saying it in a much more discursive essay kind of way. So you've got 3 texts and the different layers, and the whole thing is called Hidden Agenda ×3, or Hidden Agenda 3. And as you can see on the left, there's a sort of work in progress thing. I'm quilting it right at the end there. I've got my walking foot on and I'm quilting, doing a final quilt to get the backing fabric layer of backing on. And so I like to think that this works because the hidden agenda, words hidden agenda appear in all 3 levels of the text, if you like, all 3 stages. And that is the sort of meaning of the whole thing. And I like to think, sticking my neck out here, that this is I like to think this is something textiles can do that are not quite so easy to do in other media. Do this on top of. And it's made actually for an exhibition of my quilt art group called Layers and Narrative. It sort of fitted the theme quite well. But I mean, you could do it with printing. I suppose you could do a text and then a sort of transparent text on top and another text on top. But very hard to do that with actual painting, wouldn't it? It'd be very difficult to do it. And I suppose you could.
Listen, a graphic designer could do it on a computer, but we're not talking about
it. With Photoshop. Yeah.
Is there any limit? How do you know?
Layers, you've got your textile layers all held together with stitch, and the sort of meaning and the content. And, you know, as I say, I like to think it all comes together at the end.
Yes.
Great
How
fun
do you know when to stop? Some of your quilts seem to have a very clear ending. You know, if you're working in a circle, there's only so many layers and you'll have a finite shape to work within. But with something like that, I guess the machine won't let you continue stitching through layers. But do you have a sort of an idea of when to stop on a piece, stop layering?
Well, I wouldn't. Let it go. I don't think I would put another layer onto that because it's hard enough to read as it is. I think 3 is fine, is enough. I mean, what you find when you look at it is that you can't read all the text at once. You know, you're either seeing the letters right at the back, which you can barely see, the hidden agenda in grey, or you're seeing the intermediate layer and reading that, or you're reading the red essay on the top, but your eye won't let you see the whole lot, read the whole lot at the same time. Yeah, so it's quite funny, really. It's sort of like a sort of, not an optical illusion, but your brain won't let you read more than one layer at a time. Home in on whichever one you're reading. And the rest.
It's another one you want to stand there and watch someone look at because they probably get closer and closer as they get through each layer.
People don't always spot the hidden agenda at the back. It's, you know, actually shows up better in photographs than it does on the real thing. But that's fine because it's hidden, right? It's fine.
Yeah, it's part of the concept. And just I'll show a couple more before we move to the final work that I'd like to show.
Yes, this
and
one.
I think you've got one of these hanging behind you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have. Very similar. Yes, these are all really on the same theme. They're talk about eking an idea out over a number of quilts. These are all about the danger of truth and lies in public life and what happens when you start to tell lies. So the text on the untangled lines are they're all well-known, mostly well-known quotations about truth and lying. You know, for example, being economical with the truth, or lies, damned lies and statistics, liar, liar, pants on fire. And that Abraham Lincoln one, you know, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time, and things like that. So some of them are quotations. Some of them I sort of made up, because this is another quilt where I start, I have to make sure I finish, and I'm actually sometimes plotting these things, stitching these things over the entire quilt. So it's quite hard to estimate how many words you're going to get. So it's easier if I make it up as I go along, because then I'm in control, rather than using a well-known phrase where I have to finish at the right point.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of fun doing these. I plot these lines on the back of the quilt with pencil, and then stitch the lines on from the back of the quilt, so that I don't have any horrible because they look like nothing on earth. I mean, I have to do it with coloured pencil so I don't lose where I am, and stitch them from the back to the front using the bobbin thread as the top thread, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And that gives me the sort of matrix when I will then stitch the lettering on, following around the curves, always trying to keep my letters parallel to the lines, so that they're quite often upside down as you look at it. And then right at the end, I do the circles and fill in the background with my free machine zigzag going back and forth, which is, I really enjoy doing that. It's rather like a child colouring in shapes, you know. It's just fun to do.
They do look like pencil shading. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've plotted these so that they go in, out, in, out, in, out. So I had to stitch all around them with the red thread to make sure that I went under and over and under and over before I stitched any of the text. And then when I get to a bit of text where it's going underneath a bit, I will estimate how the word is going to pan out and come out the other side, like coming out of a tunnel.
Yeah.
You know, I had thought, how on earth am I going to do that? Am I going to just sort of finish and then start the word, go back to the word at the point you left off? But that would look stupid. So I've actually have to guess, you know, if any word on there, I'm sort of guessing.
Yeah.
Sort of high and coming out as if it was actually stitched underneath. Does that? I don't know if that makes sense. It's quite hard to describe.
Yeah, and a reminder for those who are listening.
Sorry, I do it by eye.
No, that's all right. A reminder for those who are listening, do check the show notes for a link. The episode description for a link to the show notes, because you'll see the images and it will all come together when you see some of these works. But it just strikes me that you're creating these with the negative space, these designs of the text, like and you say you come from the back, and I'm incredibly intrigued how your brain works, Sarah, to put these.
Yeah, well, with this one, I mean, I have got blow by blow step images of this quilt, and I obviously do the wavy lines first, then I do the text inside the wavy lines, then I fill in the background. And with this one, I had the idea of putting the cross on the back, because when you go into a ballot box, you put a cross on your piece of paper, and also the cross is negative. Although, because it can be a kiss, obviously, but and then circles as well. So, but trying to keep it all as simple as possible, so you don't get lost in a complete. It still remains sort of graphically okay, if you know what I mean. I haven't overloaded it with too many elements.
Yeah,
try not.
Restraint in just the right places.
Well, that's the aim.
That's the aim. There's one more work I wanted to show, and as we sort of wind up our conversation today, and this piece is called Social Fabric. It's from 10 years ago. And just for those listening, it's a little bit different. It's it's a piece of fabric, red and white, very strong but fairly densely striped red and white fabric. And Sarah has stitched words over the top of the fabric. And this one is part of the collection of the International Quilt Museum. That's what my slide is telling me.
It is,
and once
yes.
you start reading the quilt or the piece, you start understanding the work. And I really liked this for that reason, that you need to start reading to understand the piece. It's so integral. So Sarah, I put Sarah on the spot just before we jumped on this call, and I asked her if she would kindly read the text to us that's stitched on the quilt.
I will, yes. Just to say that this is an old piece of mattress cloth that was found in a boot sale by a friend, and she sat on it just with this amazing, it's been used, it's quite worn, and she sat on it for 15 years not knowing what to do with it, and she gave it to me, and I sat on it for 2 years not knowing what to do with it. And in the end, I just stitched, as you can see on the slide on the right, I stitched the text onto it, changing the color of the thread on the different stripes, and the text really sums up what it is. So if I read it out: this old piece of mattress cloth was discovered in a boot sale. It's clearly been well used, as it's faded and worn. How did it come to be there? It could easily have been thrown away, yet someone took the trouble to preserve it, perhaps attracted by the bold red and white stripes, a simple and universally appealing design. Maybe whoever owned it intended to cut it up to make useful items for the home, such as cushions or bags or even rags, but something prevented her. She might have formed a sentimental attachment to it, remembering it from her childhood. For when textiles, even domestic and utilitarian textiles like this, reach a certain age, they often become valued for qualities and associations accrued over the years. They're part of a family's history, evoking memories across the generations. A worn patch, a hole, a frayed edge, or even a stain all have their stories to tell. In addition, the tactile nature of fabric communicates directly with the past. To touch a familiar piece of cloth is to be transported back to an earlier self, or to experience a connection with someone else who handled it, perhaps a mother or a grandmother. One can only speculate as to the original use of this particular length of fabric. If it was on a bed, it would have witnessed many of life's most private and intimate moments and rites of passage: birth, sleep, sex, illness, and death, moments of the greatest joy and the greatest sadness. It would have grown warm and then cooled in a daily rhythm that echoes the rhythm of life. And so, when it outlived its usefulness, it was kept. Maybe it was found among the possessions of an old lady when she died. This is when it would have been in serious danger of being thrown away. It's in less than perfect and would have been seen as low status, outdated, and impractical. Without a family connection, it could have been regarded as worthless. Yet humble textiles like this, even though they were never rare or expensive, are important to our social history. This piece of cloth is a cultural artifact. Someone must have recognized that it had value and taken it to a sale, and so it survived. So what's on the quilt is summed up by the quilt itself, if you see what I mean.
Yes. And as it happens, I think with this piece, that because of your work, that piece of fabric survives. But Sarah, because of your art practice in general, the value of quilting and the preciousness of these objects in our lives also survives. These objects are seen as items not only worthy of someone's bed, but also someone's walls, or the walls of some of the world's most incredible museums. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you for your work that brings value to these
thank you so
sometimes
much.
humble materials. It's incredible.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting
me. Thank you for being here. Now we have, to cap off the episode, we have a little rapid fire round that we do with most of our artists. It's like a little game. So we start a sentence and you respond with the first thing that comes to mind. But you can take your time. You can take your time. So it's called Every Artist Must. And so I'll say every artist must something, and then you finish the sentence. But often the first thing that comes to mind is often the best. So let's see how we go. Okay. Are you ready? Ready to have a go?
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Every artist must own.
Every artist must own a workspace.
Every artist must create.
Every artist must create something that is true to themselves.
Every artist must avoid.
Every artist must avoid getting into a rut.
Every artist must learn.
Every artist must learn that it's okay to make mistakes.
And finally, every artist must remember.
Every artist, oh geez. I think every artist must remember that they're important, but they also need a degree of humility and humour.
Oh.
And detachment.
Well done. You nailed that.
Every artist must own. Oh God.
Putting you on the spot. No, that was fantastic. Thank you. And is there anything, Sarah, that you're working on at the moment that you'd like to talk about?
Well, yes, I'm working on a piece for, I'm very, very, very lucky and fortunate. I've been offered a solo gallery at the Festival of Quilts at the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham, UK, in the first weekend of August, last day of July, first weekend of August. So I face the intimidating prospect of 8 square meters or something of wall to fill. And I will be showing some of the quilts that you've seen, but I'm making new pieces as well. So I'm making a piece that I'm going to call Too Much Information, which is all about all the stuff that is coming into you and how it's quite, from the news and from what's going on in the world and how difficult it is to sort of process it. And so that's, and I want it to be, fingers crossed, I want it to be fairly eye-catching. And for that reason, I've actually done something I've never done before, but I've used high visibility thread, that high vis colors in really bright lime green and really bright orange for the background. So the text will be in grays, but the background is in this high vis, which is not colors I would ever choose to work with or wear. But I had the idea in the middle of the night. Hey, yes, why don't I try that? And I'm really pleased, actually. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Oh, I can't wait to see. I'm hoping I'll see it in person at Festival of the Quilts.
I hope so. That would be fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Well, I was going to say this evening for me and this morning for you. It's just been fantastic to talk and like the work on your wall behind you, wind in and out and around and around and find out more about your art practice. And yeah, on behalf of our community and the audience, thank you for your time and for sharing your beautiful work with us for Friday.
Well, thank you so much for asking me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll say good night or good morning, and I'll play a little bit of an outro video to see us to the end. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.